everybody. Thanks so much for listening to Fire Breathing Rob. If you're listening to us on the radio, thanks for listening. If you're listening to us on YouTube or one of the podcast platforms, please subscribe, like, and definitely share this interview with as many people as you can. We have a real good candidate that's on, and she is up for election this November. She is running for Orlando City Commissioner District 3. This is Nicolette Springer. If you want to find more information about her, go to www.nicolettespringer.com. And she was also endorsed in her campaign by a couple of these people you will definitely know. One is the Orlando Sentinel, which just endorsed her yesterday. So congratulations on that. Obviously, you all know Anna Escamani. She's been on here many times and is a great candidate and a great legislator up in Tallahassee, and also Carlos Guillermo Smith, who is doing excellent work also up in Tallahassee. So Nicolette, first of all, thanks so much for coming on. Congratulations on these huge endorsements from the Sentinel, Anna, and Carlos. I mean, you got the triple threat there as far as endorsements. So congrats on that. Thanks for coming on the program.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm completely honored and humbled to have support from such amazing legislators and just champions for Orlando and Central Florida in general. And then yesterday with the Orlando Sentinel joining in on that, it was definitely a humbling day yesterday. I was a little surprised because I wasn't, they don't traditionally go against the incumbent. So I wasn't really sure. I've known for a while that I feel that I'm the better candidate for voters here in this district. But, when you get those nods of support from other people who've been doing this for a while, it makes you feel real good, like you're doing the right thing.
Well, you've been doing so much throughout your career in general, working with League of Women Voters. Mm-hmm. I know you're involved in mental health, and I do want to dabble into that, especially during this time of coronavirus. Mm-hmm. But before we even get into those issues, can you tell the viewers a little bit about you besides what I just said?
Sure. So I've been working in policy my entire career. I have a master's degree in criminal justice right here from UCF in Central Florida. And after I got my master's, I started working on research in criminal justice. And my research did mostly program evaluations, which means we went into government funded and also mostly government and grant funded programs, mental health court, drug court. My area of expertise is any diversion program that keeps nonviolent offenders out of jail, keeps them in the community so they can still raise their families, so they can still contribute economically, and keeps them moving forward so that we have just an overall better view of what's going on with them. And it keeps our jails not as crowded, which is more cost effective for all of us as taxpayers. And so my area of expertise was just working on those programs. I did that for many years, doing those evaluations and policy. And then I shifted my work to advocacy. And most recently, I was the Director of Government Affairs for the League of Women Voters of Florida. And that's where I really kind of grew my relationship and friendships with Carlos and Anna, because I was in Tallahassee while they were up there as legislators. But I also got a great opportunity to just get to know so many different municipalities and counties across the state, because the league has 37 leagues across the state, and got to just see different programs and what we're doing that works in so many different areas. And I hope to bring some of that knowledge base to the city of Orlando.
You did run for office in Orange County, countywide. What are you going to bring from that race to this race? Is stuff you learned, stuff that went right, stuff that went wrong?
Yeah. So definitely lessons learned. Running for office is not an easy undertaking. And the difference between the district I ran in before and the district, my cat's making a cameo in the back here. The difference mostly for me is, I want to serve the public, and I want to take my skill set and bring it to my neighbors. But from a logistics perspective of how we're running the campaign, it's just more dense on this side of town. So running field here, running a campaign when we can get to almost every part of my district within about a 15-minute drive. The furthest point is 15 minutes in any direction. Whereas in my last race, sometimes it would be 45 minutes to an hour to get to the other side of the district. It's really hard to knock on all those doors when you've got almost 200,000 constituents in a county seat as compared to, 30 or 40 here in a city seat.
So a lot of people don't really know what a city commission is, what they do. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. So City Commission does I like to tell people that if city commission stopped working, you guys would be the first ones to notice. In any level of government, if city shuts down, you're going to notice right away because we're going to stop picking up your trash. No one's going to answer 911 or send police or fire if something happens. The roads would, not continue to be cleaned, or potholes would continue to be potholes. So it's the most local part. So we have a fiscal budget that covers everything from your fire and rescue to police. It also does planning and zoning. So if you're building a home, expanding a home, if developers are coming in, all of that stuff comes before the city commission. We also do some more social services in the sense that we have like mentorship programs that we partner with OCPS. We do all different types of very local work here in the city. So when you hear about programs coming from the city, it's most often stuff that's really first touch with the neighbors. It's not as distant as like a state policy or a federal policy.
Again, for people that are just tuning in, Nicolette Springer, she is running for Orlando City Commission District 3. Definitely check her out on nicolettespringer.com. Obviously, we said this in the earlier on, she was endorsed by the Orlando Sentinel on Escamani State Rep for District 47, and also Carlos Guillermo Smith, who is also a state rep. As we keep going into this, Nicolette, I watched I watched the debate between you and your other two opponents. I'm sure some people did and some people didn't, because there's a lot of people that, obviously being in Orlando, work in the service industry, and they have all these other things to keep up with throughout the coronavirus, worrying about homelessness, worrying about their jobs in general, and everything else in the kitchen sink. Can you talk about what the differences were in that debate between you and your opponents, just in case people didn't watch it?
Yeah, so, we had that town hall last Monday, it was about a week ago. And I think the biggest difference that showed up from my perspective is, I'm the only candidate that has statewide policy experience and has worked with multiple municipalities. And I believe that I'll be bringing data-driven solutions to the city. But one of the other things that I think stood out was, one of my opponents was very much on the defensive about some of his voting record. I was just stating facts, and there seems to be a little bit debate about whether or not he agreed with those facts. But I feel like we got through that a little bit. And I would say that the other side of that too is some of the policies that my opponent keeps pushing forward are policies that the city has just continued to do over and over again, in that mentality of this is how we've always done it, so this is how we should continue to do it. And I just disagree on that. I think we need to have more modernized solutions. We've got more modern problems than what it looked like, 5, 10, 16 years ago when my opponent was elected. City of Orlando is a very different place than it was 16 years ago.
What are you going to do to kind of shake it up? Because it's the establishment when you win and walk into this. And so how are you going to kind of break up that monopoly in there in the city council? I mean, in the city council.
I think for me, my style of working with others across, whether it's across ideology aisles or just across how we want to manage government, is not to really lead with that hammer. I'm not going to go in and start setting things on fire. I think you lead with you lead with a little bit of honey, I think, and you kind of see where you go with that. That being said, I don't plan on backing down from what I've been campaigning on, which is that we need some change in this city. And I think that some of the issues that I've been championing have just been ignored. Pedestrian safety is one example. We are the worst in the country for pedestrian safety. We average about 300 fatalities a year in Orlando. That's almost a death a day. That's unbelievable that no one has said, hey, this is a problem, we should address it. So I will continue to be champion for that. And then I also think I'm going to start asking a lot of questions that no one's been asking. And as far as, Mayor Dyer, him and I have a working relationship outside of this campaign. We've worked before on some advocacy issues together. Campaigning is campaigning, and that's kind of how business runs. But I suspect when I get to the commission that we'll be able to put that aside and get some work done and serve the people of Orlando together. We do align on a lot of ideological issues, but that doesn't mean that I don't get to ask him the hard questions and hold his feet to the fire a little bit on some of these issues. And I think the same goes for a lot of my other, potential future commissioners.
I want to talk about this because you just brought up about safety as far as, biking and stuff like that. I live closer toward, the Disney area, and I know
Mhm.
we have people over there, and I know that's not really near you, but regardless, it's still part of Orlando, Disney Universal. I mean, if you were to bike on some of those roads, that's like a death sentence. I mean, let's be straight up honest with each other. So, downtown Orlando has, beautiful things. I mean, the Dr. Phillips Center, the Magica down there. There's many concerts, beautiful bars, and other attractions down there. So, how are you going to make it safer in that aspect? Because we have people coming from Orlando, I mean, to Orlando rather, from all over the world, whether they're coming to that Disney Universal area or they're even coming downtown to go see an Orlando City game or a
Mhm.
Pride game in general. So,
Right.
it's got to be a little bit safer. And then I do want to go into crime after that.
Sure. I think from the pedestrian safety perspective, like I said, I don't think anyone's really been asking those hard questions. So one of the things I'd like to do when I get into office is to start looking at this, where the main offenders are as far as intersections. There are clusters. When you look, the traffic division in the city has these maps, and you can see they have these red dots on the maps where it shows you where the pedestrian issues are. We know that there's certain intersections that are worse than others. And I think we start there. It's low hanging fruit. We start where we know the biggest problem is. And some of these are going to require some major investment and some major infrastructure, but other ones may just be, we need to update, maybe it's a stop sign and now it needs to be upgraded to a traffic light. Maybe it doesn't have a stop sign at all. Maybe we need a raised pedestrian walkway. I think there's going to be multiple solutions depending on the district, depending on the part of Orlando. But to just not address it at all is not a good answer. We don't just throw up our hands and say, well, we just continue to be, and we're continuously ranked the worst for pedestrian safety. It's not like this is a one-time thing. And so I think that we have to do that. As far as, out where you are with more of a tourist kind of side of town, I think that there's also an education piece from a pedestrian safety. I know I see this all the time. I see people who just don't use the crosswalk. And sometimes
Yeah.
it's because the crosswalk's really far apart from the next crosswalk, so they just need to cross the street. And sometimes I just see people not doing it. So I do think it needs to be a combination of some infrastructure change, and also the city needs to just get on board with a PSA and public service announcements. And we can partner with, some of our other agencies and make sure people know this is a problem. If you look at it in the perspective of when we were trying to transition kids from riding bikes with helmets, and saying that's a thing, it took a long time to get that to be the norm. I think if we're talking about it more, we make it a safety program, we take it a public service announcement, it makes it a little bit easier.
My question is on violence in general. Now, we've seen a rise in violence throughout the country
Mhm.
because of, I believe personally, because of coronavirus and because our country's let us down. People have lost jobs, they've lost their houses. What are people to do if they lose the things that they need? Obviously, it's two and two together. If people don't have child care and all these other issues that are in this $3.5 trillion plan, not to go national on you, but what's true is true, then people are going to look to other avenues. Petty theft is up
Mhm.
too. So, what is your take on the rise in violence that we're seeing in Orlando? Because I've been told that crimes, heavy crimes have went down, but the
Right.
petty theft and the rise in violence in general has gone up.
That's true. So in the city of Orlando, based on the OPD's most recent report, we are down in crime in general, I think by about 22%, but we're up about 27%, or I'm sorry, 17% for violent crime, which is honestly the crime we're most all concerned about, right? Like everyone, not to say that anyone wants their car broken into, but we definitely don't want to be attacked. Like the fear that we have about crime is usually violent crime. And that's what we're seeing the uptick on. I agree with you about some people are in a mode of desperation. They're losing their job. They're out. They don't have enough money. They can't make rent. We've got this housing crisis that an affordable housing crisis. I've spoken to multiple residents at doors and on the phone about how their rent's being increased by hundreds of dollars a month. That puts people on the streets. That makes people very desperate situations. I think what we need to do is we need to start helping in those other areas. And I think if we start getting people back to work, if we start getting them more rental assistance, if we get them to a place where they feel stable, we're going to see less violent crime. I think part of that violent crime uptick, unfortunately, is because of domestic violence issues. We had a whole stint last year where a good portion of the year we were all very close quarters. And for those of us who have healthy relationships and live in safe homes, it wasn't a problem. But for many of those residents who maybe don't have that luxury, I think that's where we saw a lot of the uptick in violence as well, is domestic violence issues between family members who are in close quarters and maybe normally wouldn't be. And I think that raises the issue. You know, the city of Orlando has been given a good portion of money from CARES dollars, to make this back to your national point, and for the American Rescue dollars, and yet we haven't spent a lot of it. And so, and there's not a plan yet. You know, when I looked online, I checked a couple of days ago, City of Orlando hasn't published their plan about how they're going to spend that. The bill was passed by the Biden administration in March. The money was distributed in June. They got a second wave of money later on. So this is not new. It wasn't like we were surprised, and yet we still don't have a plan about how we're spending that money. And so from my perspective, that's part of how we fix the violent crime issue, is we put that money back into the community. We get people back to work. We get people feeling more housing stable, more income stability. And then I think we'll see, I mean, there's other ways, but I think that's a big part of why we're seeing that increase.
But between housing, healthcare, childcare, I mean, $10 an hour, which a lot of people in Orlando, whether they're working, there's a lot of people that work in downtown Orlando, and they're going to work at Universal. They're going to work at Disney, right, SeaWorld, and all these other hotels. And that's what they're making, and they can't afford it. So, you know, that's the issue there, is, you know, getting paid a living wage. I don't know how much as a city, if, you know, on the commission, you could do anything about that. I know we passed that amendment. That was state law now, that it's going to go up to 15. Is there anything the city of Orlando can do to raise the minimum wage a little bit higher, so these people that do live downtown, whether they're commuting to, like I said, Disney, Universal, SeaWorld, or the hotels around the area, and even in downtown Orlando, can at least make somewhat of a better wage, that, you know, they can live somewhat a little bit more stable, I guess.
Right. I think that, you know, right now the city of Orlando, all employees who are employed by the city of Orlando make $15 an hour. So the city has flexed there and made sure that we're in that position. I think what we need to be reminded when it comes to minimum wage, $15 should be the beginning. It shouldn't be the ceiling of where we are. And the statewide, everyone getting around 10 right now is helpful. But there's a big gap for our service workers. We are a tourist dependent industry. Most of our workers who are struggling for affordable housing are working for less than $10 an hour, because they're working on servers and bar wages, which comes in at about $8 an hour. What I think the city could do is, we deal with a lot of vendors. We have a lot of vendors who work on city property, and we don't require them to pay $15 an hour. And I do think that that would help close some of the gap. And some of those vendors are at the airport and MCO. Some of those vendors at the Amway. They're at other locations that the city, it's on city grounds. I think the city should flex some muscle there and say that, you know, if you're going to operate on property that's owned by the city of Orlando, then we will then tell you that you need to pay a livable wage. And I think when you look at the people who are struggling, they're not just unemployment's down, and it's because people got 2 or 3 jobs, not because people aren't, you know. I spoke to a mom the other day. She's a single mom. She lives in my district. She's working 3 jobs to make ends meet. She's done everything that society has asked her to done. She has a degree, she has a career, but she got her hours cut because she was working for a tourist industry job during COVID. So she went down to reduced hours. She picked up a part-time job at Target to make ends meet. And then she went and got her real estate license to try to see if she can make ends meet that way. And she's hustling to do that. And she just got a notice from her landlord that her rent's going to go up $200 a month. And that, I've heard that version of that story of many, many times over the last couple months. And I think that that's what people need to kind of, when we say we're having a housing crisis and we're having a shortage of workers, nobody's sitting around not wanting to work. I think that that's a myth, and there's a few bad apples who are doing that. But for the most part, people are happy to go to work. They want to be independent. They want to be able to support themselves, but they can't go do that if it's for $8 an hour, because it's just not feasible for them. They can't pay their bills at that rate.
Again, this is Nicolette Springer. She is running for Orlando City Commissioner, District 3. If you want to learn more about her, go to nicolettespringer.com. What should we do about that violence downtown? Because it seems like if you read the Sentinel or you watch WFTV or what other station you watch, it's like a murder or someone getting hurt or a policeman getting shot down there. I mean, what should we do downtown?
So, I think I agree with you on some of the points that a lot of what we're seeing downtown is it's normal what's happening in most downtowns. I don't think it's exclusive to Orlando. I think we're
No,
seeing
right.
this nationwide. We've got a bad combination of there are a good deal of people who are struggling financially, who are struggling mental health wise. They're going out to let some steam off at the bars, and then we add in alcohol, and things just don't go well, right?
Mm.
And we've done a few stints where they've had curfews, where they've tried to restrict, the streets of who can go pass through things. They've stopped doing some of those corridored off areas that we have downtown. We've tried different avenues to do this. I don't know what the best way to address it is, but I think it has a lot to do with our business community and how we have a relationship with them. And I think what would be best is if we brought some of those business leaders into a roundtable with the commissioner, with the mayor, and said, it's in your best interest to stay open. You want people to stay there until 2 a.m. or whatever time you're open till, and you want to keep serving. That's how they're making your money. But we also want the streets of Orlando safe. So how do we work together? And I think there's a space there for there to be some partnerships and some just everyone acting as a good neighbor. I think the bars and the restaurants down there would probably have some good input. I'm sure their employees are at risk every night of
Yeah.
violence from people who have been overserved, if you will, and I'm sure they want to curb that as well. They don't want people to think it's an unsafe establishment. They want to bring in patrons to spend money there, and we want to keep our streets safe. We all want the same thing. So I think we bring them to the table and we start having some real conversations about what it looks like, and that may mean some more restrictions downtown, but maybe not. Maybe it's some simple fixes. Maybe it doesn't even cost us anything. Maybe it's just, how we have those relationships and have those conversations. But I don't think we can get to a solution unless we're talking to all the stakeholders. And right now, I feel like we're leading with a very heavy hand against the bar owners and the restaurant owners. And quite honestly, these guys took such a big hit during COVID.
Yeah.
What we don't want is them shutting down, because that's a loss of employment. That means there's going to be more unemployment issues, but also we just don't want shuttered doors downtown in Orlando. We want to keep those doors open. No one wants to see empty storefronts. That's
Well,
not good for anybody downtown.
well, I agree with you, Nicolette. The more jobs that are shut down, leads people toward more violence. So, and obviously unemployment, and the list goes on and on. So people don't have money. They're going to do different things, crazy things. So we don't want that. So when you say bring people together, you talking about like big establishments in downtown. We're talking about the Dr. Phillips Center, the Magic, obviously the mayor, the police, Church Street officials, that have bars and restaurants down there. Are you talking about bringing those groups together as far as that goes?
I think we need to bring them together, but also some of the small business owners. Many of those
Right.
establishments are owned by pretty big conglomerates,
Correct,
but there's
yeah.
also just some small, mom and pop style restaurants and bars that are down there, unique ones. I think we need to bring them to the table. They're often swept under the rug because they just kind of go with whatever the big guys do. And we appreciate all levels of government, whether it's, a bigger chain restaurant or establishment. And then we also like the uniqueness of having those smaller businesses. I think we need to bring them all to the table. They're going to have somewhat different needs. But I think overall we can find some common ground.
We're going to go into the audience questions now, Nicolette. So what can we do about this mental health crisis in Orlando?
I think this is twofold, because as far as the availability of mental health providers, I know that is a problem nationwide and here in Orlando,
Right.
but I think there's a good portion of people who don't have access to mental health providers because they don't have insurance. And so there's a group of people who probably are seeking it out and just can't afford it. And then there's a group of people who have insurance and can afford it and seeking out and can't find providers. So there's two different problems there. I mentioned earlier about the American Rescue dollars, and I'm eager to hear what our city does with that money. And it's because it's been pretty blanket given out. We can use it for a lot of things. Many municipalities are using it for major infrastructure projects. City of Gainesville has decided to put broadband across the entire city. That's what they're using their money for. So we can get creative with how we use this money. And I think that looking at things like childcare that you mentioned earlier, which is such a burden on so many families, looking at how we can bridge the gap for mental health resources is a possibility. I think putting it back into our community where we can make healthier citizens and more productive workers makes the most sense. If we use that money in a way that giving directly to residents. I would hate to see it go to more road projects. I mean, as much as I want to see more bikeable Orlando, I don't think that's the way we use that money. We need to use that money to make sure that we're actually giving direct services to people when they need it, where they need it, which is right now. I'd love to see an expansion of the rental assistance. I think if we get if we can get access to some mental health providers and we can expand that network here in the city of Orlando, and maybe we use some of that money to create some programs or to put into agencies that already exist. We don't have to create the wheel. Some of those providers already exist here, and we have some wonderful nonprofits in the city of Orlando that we could partner with to get services out to people. I would love to see some mobile healthcare units going around. We've already started a small pilot program with some of our police force. OPD and sheriff have a community response team where they've partnered with mental health workers and social workers with our police. I'd love to see that expand. The city has just voted to make it bigger. I think it needs to be the primary focus of how we're doing those kind of services here. And I'd love to see it in our schools as well.
But what about money to build more affordable housing in the city to get, people that housing that they do need?
Yeah, I mentioned this in one of the interviews that I had done earlier. I don't know if it was the Sentinel or the Town Hall, but one of the things that we are not doing is we are not requiring new developments to have a certain percentage of their housing be affordable housing. And we're not doing it with any teeth. So we do have some conversations where we say, well, what percentage of this is going to be, and most developers will come in with some number, whether it's a percentage or a number of units. And we say, okay, that sounds good, but we don't have any authority to hold them to that. And the way that we can get some authority is if we passed an ordinance, if we updated our codes so that the city can say every unit that's built or every development that's built has to have X number of units or a certain percentage of units that are staying at a certain threshold. And that threshold should be based on national standards. I can't give you a percentage off the top of my head, but we have national standards that we can follow that we know would work. And what that does is it should work in perpetuity, because right now, and this is no different than anyone who owns a home, we know very well when you buy your house, your mortgage is often sold over and over again. And so like maybe you buy a house and within the year, you've got a new bank that you're making that mortgage payment to. That's happening in big developments too. So a developer comes in, buys a property, builds a property, and then he or she's oftentimes selling that big property off to other people. Well, when that happens, the agreement we made with them about keeping a certain percentage affordable is now gone. We didn't negotiate with the new owner, and so they have no authority to keep it going. But if we put it in code, if we put an ordinance in place, then we would be able to carry that over in perpetuity through every owner who had that development. So we would at least keep what's the word I'm looking for? If we would keep an inventory, basically, of certain units across the city that would maintain a certain level. And that could be a sliding scale. There's ways to define what that means. But this idea that we're just going to let everyone build and have, $1,500, $2,000 rents on one-bedroom apartments is not achievable when you have people making, $30,000 a year at a minimum wage. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it's a joke. And, we all know that how high the housing prices has been this, right now. So, whether you're trying to buy a home or rent, it's a total joke right now for somebody that's in the working class. That, like you said, that's making $30,000, even 40 or 50. It's still a joke. So anyways, to go into these questions, right, this is from Jared from Orlando here, Winter Park specifically, he says, he's asking the question about overdevelopment. And I kind of relate to this because I went to college in Palm Beach County. And I'm sure if you've been to Palm Beach County, you know the story. In Broward County, too. It's overdevelopment city over there. Everything is overdeveloped down there. The traffic is abysmal over there. So are you worried about the overdevelopment right now of the city? And how about putting some green areas, he said, for kids and, making sure those historical businesses stay there, too, around Orlando? So, how would you handle that?
So one of the things that we've been talking about is smart growth in my district. And I don't think that we could stop all development. I don't think that's good for
Right.
economics. I don't think that's good for anyone. But we need to be asking these questions about one example is how many of these units are going to be affordable. What kind, we should also be asking, what are they giving back to the community from a green space perspective? If they're going into an area that's not green, maybe it's an older building that they're trying to rehab, or it's already something that's been paved over, that's a different story. But if we're going in and actually taking out some trees and taking out some green space, there should be there definitely needs to be some conservation that we're keeping in place there, particularly when we're talking about how many lakes. We've got a ton of lakes in our district. We neighbor right up to the chain of lakes in Winter Park. And what happens in one of our lakes happens in all of our lakes. And so keeping that green space where we are makes the most sense. And one of the things from a development perspective, I don't necessarily think we've overdeveloped. I think we've just overdeveloped in certain areas, in certain types of development. We need to diversify our development. And I think that's what would help. So right now I feel like we're very heavy on these high-end condos and or apartment buildings. And we need to get to a space where we're diversifying. So it's duplexes, it's single family homes, it's apartments, it's multifamily homes, where we just see an array of housing. I think would help more than just these continuing big buildings of apartments overhead. It's not what fills the gap for what we need right now.
Right. The last two questions. What is your future for the city of Orlando when elected?
What's my vision for the future for the city of Orlando? I would like to see a city of Orlando where everyone is thriving. I think right now there seems to be a real big gap between who's doing really well and who's struggling. And that's a trend across our country, unfortunately. But I think, being the city of Orlando, we have a unique opportunity with the leadership that we have in this district, whether it's our state level leadership or even our city commissioners and our mayor. We have an opportunity where we can be an example for what every city in the country should look like. We have the ability to bring in some real good funds. We've done well with what we've brought in from the CARES Act and the American Rescue Act. But most of all, we have an enormous budget. We have a pretty big tax revenue pool that we bring in every year. And I want to make sure that we're using that well to give back to people so that we can thrive in this community together. I think right now we oftentimes have policies that are more inclined to serve those who are already doing well and performing well, and we're not doing enough to help those get to the next level. And oftentimes an investment in a service that helps someone pays back tenfold. So, if we put money into, say, a childcare, that's going to change someone's way of living. It's going to change how much they could afford to put out into the economy. So for every dollar we invest in, say, for example, the arts community, we get back $9. And so we need to get to a space where we're okay with making some investment because we're looking long-term at the return of that investment. And I think right now, sometimes we're a little short-sighted. We think, oh, that's too much money, we don't want to spend it. But if we look globally and look 5-10 years down the road, I think we'll see a big return on those investments.
Last question. Are you worried about, obviously, election is in November. It's this year. Obviously, this is an off-year election. Are you worried about the turnout and making sure people get out for this election? Because that's usually how these off-year elections are.
I think anyone who's ever worked for a campaign or ran for office will tell you we are always worried about turnout, right? So, I mean, we need people to turn out. Every vote matters. You hear all this language. When we started our campaign, when I decided to run, and as you had mentioned earlier, this is my second run. And what the difference that I had going into this one was we were going to start field day one. So I announced my campaign on June 7th. We started knocking doors on June 7th. We have not stopped since. So we've knocked on over 25,000 doors. We've spoken to thousands of people, and we are having conversations. We're pushing out the vote. We're talking. We were averaging about 1,000 phone calls a day this week.
Wow.
And getting people out. I've been calling, everyone in my family's making phone calls. We have a slew of volunteers making phone calls. So yes, I'm always nervous about turnout, but I also have a lot of confidence in my team and the strategy that we put forward that we're getting people out to vote. I've got people calling and texting me. I had a real sweet gesture the other day. I have a yard sign in front of my house. 2 of my neighbors came by and stuck their "I voted" sticker on it. And I thought that was super kind. And I highly encourage that. If you are a neighbor in my neighborhood and you want to stick your voted sticker on my yard sign, I think that's really sweet. And I was so excited when I didn't know what it was when I first pulled up. I walked over, I was like, what happened to my sign? And I noticed it was someone had stuck the "I voted." So I'm always nervous about that. I think everyone is, but we have a good strategy to get people out. And I think people are excited about the next chapter of leadership. I think Rep Escamani has, I've said this to her before, I think she's paved the way where people have an expectation of the type of leader and the level of customer service, for a lack of a better term, that you expect from your elected official. We have very similar ideologies and very similar styles in that regard. And I'm going to lead the same way that I've been campaigning, which is out in the community. I don't plan on spending a lot of time in my office in City Hall. And so I think people see that and they're excited about it.
I think people are just sick of the BS. They're just sick of people talking at them instead of to them. And I think that's the problem right now. Well, I'm happy that people are really receptive. And, I've heard a lot of great things, like I said, and, through talking to you in this interview, if I lived in the district, I would support you. I hope that people, if they, hear this and they live in the district, they support you. So as we end, where can people find more about you? How can they help in these last few days before the election?
Sure. So my website is www.nicolettespringer.com. And on that website, you can find all about my policies. My cell phone number is on the website. Top right corner is my cell phone number. Feel free to text me or call. I get calls and emails all the time asking questions, and I'm happy to answer them. As far as volunteer outreach, we are looking for people to help knock doors, to help phone bank. We're looking for a voter protection team. If you want to be one of the people who goes to the polls and watches and makes sure that everyone has what they need on election day, we're looking for those types of volunteers, but every little bit helps. And honestly, the biggest help we can get is if you live in the district or people who live in the district, tell them to vote for me. We're in the part of the campaign where it's just get out the vote. So most importantly, get everybody to turn in their ballots early if you're voting by mail, and tell your friends to vote for Nicolette Springer.
And it is November 2nd, correct?
November 2nd. We are 3 weeks today. No, 3 weeks as of yesterday.
All right, Nicolette Springer again. .com. Definitely check her out, help her out, volunteer, throw a couple of bucks if you can. Yep, I appreciate your time, Nicolette. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And I think she's Italian, correct?
I am. I am.
Right, so
I gather you are as well.
Positive. Okay.
Yeah, my maiden name is Bariello.
All right.